So my Penguin episode 4 review is coming a little bit late because, as many of you know, I do live in Florida and I was affected by Hurricane Milton. I lost power in my home from around 10:45 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday to Sunday evening, like around maybe 9 or 10. But I had a bunch of work to catch up on my other channel. So now I'm going to bring you my Penguin review. I also was unable to do my review for Wrestle Dream. I did see it, and I might do a thoughts video tomorrow or later today. I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to do it, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that happened on that show. But let's talk about the Penguin episode 4. The previous episode really focused on Victor and telling his story. Episode 4 is called C'est Nani. I may be pronouncing that wrong. It's like a French word or something. But again, so far this show continues to, be fun to watch because it's still, like, I sort of like the whole, like, underworld, who can you trust, like, mafioso type of story. And this does it well. It's really a lot more serious. It's not sort of like a semi-satire like Sopranos is. It's a bit more serious. And with a bit of a darker tone. So, like the previous episode was about Victor and his backstory, this episode was all about Sofia, which is interesting because as of the last episode, I thought it was going to eventually end with Sofia being taken out, but apparently they have plans for this character at least through the first season and maybe into the next Batman film. This episode focused on Sofia's backstory, and we find out some pretty interesting things that we didn't know. Like, for example, how does she end up in Arkham Asylum? This goes into it. How does she get the name The Hangman? This goes into it, and it's all because of Carmine Falcone. So we find out that Carmine Falcone is the one that basically framed her into going into Arkham and called her The Hangman. Now, what ends up happening is the majority of this episode is a flashback to the events that occurred before this series began. The show introduces this character named Dr. Ventress, and I'm not really sure how I feel about him. He didn't get enough screen time for it to really matter that much to me, but what ends up happening is he gives her electroshock therapy. And he has a buddy named Dr. Rush, and he eventually sees that Sofia's innocent, and he doesn't want any part of this. And it ends up basically leading to Sofia having a complete and utter meltdown. Now, they introduce a character also who is Sofia's cellmate named Magpie. Now, when I first heard the way this character spoke and when I first heard like the way that this character was behaving, I thought it was Harley Quinn. And I'm thinking to myself, man, Joker 2 just came out, a couple weeks ago. And we're already here introducing another Harley Quinn. This would be the third live-action Harley Quinn, but that's not Harley Quinn. I found out that Magpie is a DC Comics character that is not Harley Quinn. Now, I want you to understand something. I'm not familiar with DC Comics anywhere near as much as I am Marvel, and even that I'm not really an expert on it. So, characters like Magpie, I'm not going to know anything about. So Sofia ends up, like, the whole episode was being created so that we have sympathy for Sofia, so that we empathize with her character, which tells me that she's not going to end up being a villain, even though the previous 3 episodes began to paint her as such and began to paint her as an antagonist and as a character that Oz is going to eventually betray, which may still happen. This gave us a ton of empathy for her because she was not only framed, it had to do a 6-month bid at Arkham, she was framed by her own father. And that's something that, what do you want me to tell you, was wild. Now, I do want to discuss the fact that John Turturro does not play Carmine Falcone. Even though timeline-wise, it wasn't that long ago, it was still a replacement actor, and instead of it being John Turturro, it was Mark Strong, who had a pretty decent performance. I wouldn't say he's on John Turturro's level, in my opinion, playing this character, but there wasn't anything here that I thought was offensive or wrong. What ended up happening is, because I looked into it, John Turturro was busy scheduling conflicts, and that was a relief, because one of the things I don't like is that sometimes these actors will do the movies but not do like the TV shows associated with it because they may see themselves as being, too big for that. And John Turturro has had a long career in film. The first time I ever saw him was Do the Right Thing back in 1989. I didn't watch the movie back then, but that's when it came out. And he's great there. So it's not him here, and he did a decent job. I'm not saying he wasn't, Mark Strong was bad, but I was kind of surprised. I was like, wait, is that really Carmine Falcone? I thought for a second it might have been like another member of the family, like, anybody else. But no, it was him. I checked, and then, of course, as the episode went on, it was him. But without question, the highlight of this episode was the performance by Kristen Milioti. She's a good actress, and I do want to say she's quite attractive in this episode. Like, she has, I talked about this before, she has very pretty eyes. Like, she has very, very pretty eyes. And she was gorgeous in this episode, and for the majority of it. And she just nailed this performance of this woman who, in the previous episode, seems like this hardened, just almost like a psychopath. Not quite, but almost. But here she shows vulnerability. And what ends up happening is, in the episode, she ends up killing Magpie, which sort of begins her descent into madness, into becoming who she would become, later on. So it's really interesting. And then what ends up happening, and this was a really tense episode. She finds out that Oz did kill Alberto. And now I'm like, okay, this is getting good. Now I'm starting to see this is getting really good, because who's going to play who? Who's going to manipulate who? How is this going to go down? That's the question. And what ends up happening is, and I could not tell if this was in her own head or if this actually happened, but she ends up taking out everybody from the Falcone family, including Luca. And the only one that lives is Gia, her daughter, who had some great scenes, great scenes with Sofia. Like, great stuff. And Vidi. So she went, this episode sort of encompassed how an semi-innocent person, daughter of a crime boss, a crime lord, who dealt with this sort of, confliction because her mom was killed. It's hinted that her mom was murdered by Carmine Falcone, that her dad killed her mom. And it shows how somebody who's a tortured soul, how the world and even members of your own family can change you forevermore. And to me, this was my favorite episode of the season. Let me scale it back for a minute. It was either this one or episode 1. Those were two phenomenal episodes. I think this might have edged it out slightly. It might have been my favorite. So, what'd you think about Penguin episode 4, season 1? Let me know in the comments below.